The morning was too quiet for trouble. No wind. No birds. Just the soft crack of firewood splitting behind my cabin. Tucked deep in a mountain valley most people didn't even know had a name. That's when I heard tires on gravel, slow, deliberate. Not lost. Not curious. Confident. A police SUV rolled into view, lights off, dust hanging in the air like a warning. Behind it stood a woman I'd never seen before, arms crossed, chin high, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that says she already believes she's right. She spoke before anyone else could. Said there had been complaints. Said I was trespassing. Said the cabin wasn't approved, the land wasn't zoned, and that I needed to cooperate if I didn't want things to get complicated. She introduced herself as part of the HOA from down the road, as if that explained everything. As if authority traveled uphill just because she said so. I looked past her at the trees, the ridgeline, the long stretch of land disappearing into morning fog. This place wasn't just where I lived. It was where my family's history was buried. Where old survey markers still hid beneath moss and snow. Where silence meant safety. Yet here she was, calling the cops on my cabin, convinced she was protecting her neighborhood from someone like me. The officers asked routine questions. Name, ID, how long I'd been there. She interrupted often, correcting them, guiding the narrative, pushing for action. Her confidence grew with every sentence, like the outcome was already decided. I could feel the tension tightening, not just between us, but inside me, because the truth I was holding back wasn't simple. It wasn't something you blurt out on a gravel road in front of strangers. This wasn't just about an HOA dispute or a misunderstanding over property lines. It was about power, about who gets to decide who belongs where, about assumptions made when someone sees a quiet cabin and a man who keeps to himself. As one officer stepped aside to make a call and the woman's smile widened, I realized something was about to shift. Papers were about to surface. Names were about to be checked. And when they were, everything she thought she knew about this valley and about me was about to fall apart. But standing there in that moment, with the air heavy and the outcome uncertain, only one question mattered. What happens when the person you try to remove turns out to own far more than you ever imagined? The officers stayed professional, but I could sense the shift, the subtle pause when things stopped being routine. While one of them spoke quietly into his radio, the other kept his eyes on me, not hostile, just curious. The woman from the HOA didn't notice. She was too busy explaining, layering accusation on top of assumption, talking about unauthorized structures and community standards. Like those words carried weight everywhere. Out here, they didn't. I hadn't always lived this far from people. Years ago, after my father passed, I left the city with nothing but a box of documents and a key that didn't look important until you knew what it opened. The cabin wasn't a getaway. It was an anchor, built on land my family had quietly held for generations, long before paved roads or homeowners associations decided where lines should be drawn. The valley wasn't marked by fences. It was marked by memory. That's what made this moment so unsettling. Watching a stranger stand on soil she didn't recognize, claiming control with a clipboard and a confident tone, felt like watching history repeat itself in miniature. She spoke about rules as if they were universal. I listened, saying little, because sometimes silence is the only way to keep the truth from exploding too. Soon, the tension wasn't loud. It was in the way the officers glanced between us. In the way the woman kept checking her phone, waiting for confirmation that she was right. In the way my hands stayed steady even though my pulse wasn't. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. If she pushed hard enough, she could drag this into court, into public records, into a past I'd worked hard to protect. I thought about my father, how he warned me that land isn't just owned, it's challenged. That people will test boundaries they don't understand, especially when they believe they have authority on their side. Standing there, I realized this confrontation was bigger than one call to the cops. It was a collision between quiet ownership and loud entitlement. When the officer returned from his call, his expression was unreadable. The woman leaned forward, ready for the verdict. I felt the weight of the valley behind me, acres of silence holding their breath. Whatever was about to be said wouldn't end this. It would only pull the story deeper, toward truths neither of them was prepared to face. The officer cleared his throat but didn't speak right away. Instead, he asked the HOA woman a few follow-up questions: who filed the complaint, which properties were supposedly affected, how far her authority extended. Each question seemed reasonable, but to her they felt like delays. Her answers grew sharper, more defensive. She mentioned neighbors who felt uneasy, properties that might lose value, rules meant to keep the valley orderly. It wasn't hard to hear what she wasn't saying. People like me didn't fit her picture of the place. That was when another car pulled up, slower than the police SUV. A man stepped out, older, dressed neatly but nervously. One of the neighbors from the lower road. He avoided my eyes, spoke quietly to the HOA woman, then glanced at the officers. I'd helped him clear a fallen tree the previous winter. He'd thanked me then. Now he looked torn, caught between gratitude and fear of being on the wrong side of authority. The valley had a way of forcing choices like that. As they talked, I felt the moral weight of staying silent press harder. I could end this quickly. One phone call, one name, but doing that would expose more than I was ready to share. Ownership in my family had always been handled carefully, quietly, not out of greed but out of protection. The land had been spared because it wasn't flaunted. I wondered if defending myself now would unravel that balance. The HOA woman, sensing momentum slipping, shifted tactics. She spoke directly to me, her voice almost friendly, suggesting cooperation would make this easier for everyone. It was an offer wrapped in threat. Admit fault, step aside, let the system work. Her flaw was subtle but dangerous. She believed compliance was the same as fairness. The officers exchanged another look. Procedures were being weighed. Lines were being traced on mental maps that didn't quite match the ground beneath their boots. Somewhere, databases were loading. Records were being searched. And with every passing second, the gap between perception and reality widened. I caught a glimpse of the neighbor again, his face tight with worry. He wasn't a villain. Neither, in her own mind, was the HOA woman. That's what made it complicated. Everyone believed they were doing the right thing, even as the situation edged closer to something irreversible. A radio crackled. A name was mentioned, then cut off. The officer's eyes lifted to meet mine, just for a moment. In that look was a hint of recognition or maybe surprise. The valley stayed silent, but the story beneath it was starting to move, and once it did, there would be no stopping where it led. The radio went quiet, too quiet, the kind of pause that stretches longer than it should. One of the officers turned his back, lowering his voice, while the other stayed put, hands resting near his belt, eyes moving between me and the woman from the HOA. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold off. She broke first. "So, what's the issue?" she asked, forcing a laugh that landed flat. "This shouldn't take long. It's a simple property dispute." Property dispute. The words hung there, heavy. I shifted my weight, boots pressing into dirt I knew better than my own past. My phone buzzed in my pocket once, then stopped. A message I didn't open. Not yet. The neighbor cleared his throat, stepped forward, then hesitated. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything that might defuse this. But fear won. He stepped back instead. Silence again. The officer who'd made the call turned around slowly. His expression had changed. Not dramatic, not shocked, just careful. He asked me to confirm my full name, then asked again, spelling it out this time. I nodded. The HOA woman's smile tightened. She glanced between us, sensing the shift but refusing to accept it. "That can't be right," she said too quickly. "I've reviewed the county maps myself. This land isn't—" "Ma'am," the officer interrupted gently. "We're still sorting that out. Sorting it out." Another delay. Another crack in her certainty. I thought about the files locked away in a safe miles from here. Deeds older than the HOA itself. Survey lines drawn by hand. I thought about how easily things escalate once names start matching records, once authority realizes it's standing on unfamiliar ground. The air felt thinner, every breath louder. The woman checked her phone again, tapping the screen harder this time. Her confidence was unraveling, thread by thread. She wasn't used to resistance, especially not the quiet kind. Then the officer asked the question I'd been waiting for, the one that would tip this from uncomfortable to explosive. "Sir," he said, "are you aware of any other properties associated with this parcel?" I met his eyes, held them. The valley seemed to lean in, waiting. Before I could answer, another vehicle appeared at the bend in the road, kicking up dust as it approached. The HOA woman turned toward it, relief flashing across her face. But I knew better, because whatever was about to arrive wasn't here to support her version of the story. It was here to challenge it. The vehicle rolled to a stop, and for a split second everyone assumed it was backup for her. The HOA woman straightened, confidence flickering back into place like a reflex. But when the door opened, it wasn't who she expected. It was a county land assessor, older, deliberate, carrying a weathered case instead of authority in the usual uniform. He nodded at the officers first, didn't even look at her. "That's him," the neighbor said suddenly, pointing. "Not at me, but at the assessor. He's the one who's been asking questions. About the valley." The words landed wrong. The HOA woman turned, confused, then annoyed. "Questions? About what?" The assessor opened his case on the hood of his car. Maps, old ones. Not the clean digital kind she was used to. These were creased, annotated, layered with decades of revisions. He spoke calmly, but every sentence tightened the air. There had been discrepancies, overlapping claims, a cluster of parcels that didn't align with modern HOA boundaries. And this cabin, this unauthorized structure, sat at the center of it. The officer's radio crackled again. A confirmation, a name repeated. My name. I watched the HOA woman's face change as realization crept in. She tried to interrupt, to reassert control, but the conversation was no longer hers. Authority had shifted quietly, decisively. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was procedural. The system she trusted was turning its attention away from her narrative. The neighbor stepped back, eyes fixed on the ground. He'd spoken up, but not for her. Fear had pushed him toward the truth, even if it meant burning a bridge. I felt a pang of something close to sympathy, for both of them. Choices made under pressure have a way of haunting people. The assessor looked at me then, finally. "There's more," he said. "Much more. And once we open this fully, it won't just involve your cabin." That was the real twist. This wasn't about me proving I belonged. It was about what would surface if I did. Roads, easements, developments planned without consent. "That's because no one challenged it," the assessor replied. "Until today." The officer straightened, professional but unmistakably clear. The call she'd made was no longer valid. The complaint dissolved under verified ownership. There would be no removal. No citation. No case against me. The power she'd arrived with had nowhere to stand. But the twist didn't end there. The assessor looked at me, almost apologetic. "By confirming this publicly, you've also triggered a mandatory review," he said. "Any developments built without your consent, that's going to come back to you, to decide." I felt it then, the full weight of visibility. The valley I'd protected by staying silent was now awake. The HOA woman wasn't just embarrassed. She was exposed. Her authority hadn't just failed. It had overreached. The neighbor met my eyes at last. There was relief there, and fear, because everyone now understood what I'd always known. This land wasn't a backdrop. It was a responsibility. The officers left first. Then the assessor. The neighbor followed, quiet and thoughtful. The HOA woman lingered, just long enough to look at the trees, the ridgeline, the space she tried to control without understanding. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I know," I replied. When they were gone, the valley exhaled. Wind through pine, distant birds. The same silence as before, but changed. Because the final truth was this: I never wanted power. I wanted protection. And now that the valley knew who stood behind it, nothing here would ever be invisible again. After everyone left, the valley didn't feel louder or smaller. felt honest. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has passed and nothing else needs to be said. I went back to stacking the firewood, not because the work mattered, but because routine has a way of grounding you when life shifts under your feet. The cabin was still here. The land was still here, but the weight of secrecy was gone. In the days that followed, things moved slowly, the way they always do when real ownership and real responsibility are involved. The county review began. Papers were filed. Boundaries were clarified. Some developments had to be reworked. Others paused entirely. There was frustration, yes, but also something unexpected, relief. The neighbor stopped by one evening, apologized without over-explaining, and thanked me for not turning the situation into a fight. He wasn't a villain. He was just afraid of losing his place in a system that teaches people to obey before they understand. As for the HOA woman, I never heard from her again. Not directly, but her presence lingered as a reminder of how easily authority can mistake confidence for truth. She wasn't evil. She was certain, and certainty, unchecked, is often more dangerous than malice. Owning the valley didn't mean controlling it. That was the lesson my father tried to leave me, and one I finally understood. Land isn't power, it's stewardship. It asks more questions than it answers. It demands patience, humility, and the courage to stand quietly until the moment calls you forward. Sometimes, that moment arrives as a knock on the door. Sometimes as flashing lights on a gravel road. And sometimes, it arrives disguised as conflict, forcing you to choose between staying invisible and standing up for what you've protected all along. I still live in the same cabin. The mornings are still quiet. The birds still return. But now, when I look out across the valley, I don't see something hidden. I see something entrusted. If this story reminds you of a moment when you were underestimated, misunderstood, or quietly tested, remember this. You don't owe the world an explanation until the truth is ready to speak for itself.